True crime content has been on the rise in popularity over the last few years, and serial killers remain one of the most talked about subjects within the community. In some cases, such as Ted Bundy, there is a wealth of information complete with books, podcasts, and documentaries. In other cases, there is next to no information, especially if they've just been caught. Number 5. For over 40 years, the Golden State Killer eluded Californian authorities and became one of the most notorious unknown serial killers to ever exist. Residents of Visalia, California, were shocked when a man known only as the Visalia Ransacker began targeting homes under the cloak of darkness. The ransacker would only take small items, choosing not to take expensive valuables and large amounts of cash that his victims had in their homes. Little did the people of Visalia know that the ransacker would quickly evolve into the infamous Golden State Killer. Between 1974 and 1986, the Golden State Killer was responsible for at least 13 murders, 50 assaults, and 120 robberies throughout numerous counties in California. Women and their families were left terrified, wondering if they would be his next victim, and going to every effort to secure their homes and stay safe. Little did Janelle Cruz's parents know that she would be the last confirmed victim of the Golden State Killer in May of 1986, and they would have to wait over 40 years to see justice. On May 3rd, 1986, Janelle invited a friend over after work, and the two hung out for a while. The friend recalls hearing strange noises outside of Janelle's home, but the two quickly brushed it off and went back to chatting. At around midnight, the two said their goodbyes, with the friend not knowing that she would be the last person to see Janelle alive. By the morning, Janelle's body was discovered by an estate agent who was at the property to show potential buyers around. The estate agent recalled to police that they had found Janelle in the bedroom, and it was clear she had been attacked. Forensic investigators were able to recover a DNA sample from Janelle. However, as DNA was in its infancy and very few laboratories across the country were able to offer DNA testing, the sample was placed into cold storage until the time was right. Finally, after a few years, technology had caught up and police were able to confirm their suspicions. All of the crimes were connected and perpetrated by one man. The only problem was they didn't know who they were looking for. Then in 2016, investigators decided it was time to apply new technologies to an old case. They submitted DNA collected from the crime scenes to a genealogy website called GED Match. From here, investigators worked tirelessly to create family trees and eliminate suspects one by one. This tedious process led them to one name, Joseph James DeAngelo. Investigators knew that they now needed to secure a DNA sample from DeAngelo to perform a comparison. So officers staked out his house and performed a trash pull to obtain his DNA. With bated breath, investigators waited as genealogists and lab technicians worked around the clock to analyze the sample. And then, on April 23rd, 2018, they finally had their answer. DNA testing confirmed that Joseph James DeAngelo was the Golden State Killer, a man who had managed to stay hidden from authorities for over 40 years, and he'd finally been brought to justice. The arrest and subsequent trial of DeAngelo has brought hope to families and investigators. If a disturbing mystery such as this can be solved over 40 years later, that means there is hope for other cold cases too. Joseph DeAngelo is currently serving 12 life sentences at the California State Prison. Number 4. Samuel Little made history in 2018 when he confessed to being responsible for 93 murders in 14 US states between 1970 and 2005. Only 50 of these have been verified by police officials, and Samuel Little has only ever been officially connected to 8 through the use of DNA. If these claims are true, this makes Samuel Little one of the most prolific and notorious serial killers of all time, putting him ahead of Andre Chikatilo and Gary Ridgway. Little was no stranger to the law, and in his early 20s, he was plagued by frequent arrests for crimes such as robbery, assault, and fraud. By 1975, Little had been in and out of prison at least 26 times, and each stretch brought him into contact with hardened criminals who taught him valuable lessons. After getting out of prison, Little had no intention of getting his life together and getting on the straight and narrow. Instead, between 1982 and 2005, Little is believed to have committed at least 11 murders and numerous other assaults. In 1984, police caught Little in the act. Luckily, his victim survived, and disturbingly, Little was only sentenced to serve 2.5 years for this crime. Once again a free man, Little moved to Los Angeles, where his spree continued, all the while evading the police. Investigators in Los Angeles and around the country were slowly beginning to put the pieces together and realized that their cold cases were connected. It wasn't until DNA testing was performed in 2012 that they were able to confirm that Samuel Little had been the man they were looking for. In 2018, he made the startling confession that reverberated around the world. According to the FBI, nearly 18 months after a Texas Ranger began to elicit from him a breathtaking number of confessions, the FBI has confirmed Little to be the most prolific serial killer in US history. Many of Little's victims are nameless and only have a crude drawing made by Little to identify them. According to FBI crime analyst Christy Palazzolo, for many years, Samuel Little believed he would not be caught because he thought no one was accounting for his victims. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of unsolved cases in the US that may be attributed to Samuel Little, and thanks to his confessions, we may be one step closer to solving these crimes. The FBI is asking anyone with information they believe may be connected to Little and his confessions to come forward and contact them at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Number 3. Between 1992 and 2012, the Angarsk maniac terrorized Russia, plunging its citizens into a state of fear and mistrust. It wouldn't be until 2015, when ex-policeman Mikhail Popkov was arrested, that the citizens of Angarsk could finally rest easy. Much of Mikhail Popkov's early life is unknown. All that we know for sure was that he was born on March 7, 1964. Some articles state that Popkov had a particularly rough childhood. However, these claims have never been confirmed by investigators or by Popkov himself. In his adult years, he became a police officer and dedicated his life to keeping Angarsk safe. Little did the residents of Angarsk know that the very man who had sworn to protect them was the one who was out committing the evil deeds. Popkov would use his position of power as a police officer to pick up victims. He would drive around in his police car looking for vulnerable women. When he would come upon one, he would tell them that he was a police officer and ask them if they wanted a safe ride home. Sadly, the ride home they had just accepted was anything but safe, and Popkov would drive them out to remote areas before attacking them. In 1998, for reasons that have not been disclosed, Popkov left the police force and took a job as a security guard for a local oil company. The change in jobs didn't stop him from picking up victims, and the spree continued. Police in Angarsk quickly realized that all of these attacks were connected, and dubbed the unknown attacker the Angarsk maniac, or the werewolf. Despite their best efforts, they failed to catch up with their man. That was until they discovered a vital clue. At one of the crime scenes, they found tire tracks from a car that was used by police officers across the region. This led them to the conclusion that they were hunting one of their own, and they began obtaining DNA samples from former and current police officers in the area. In total, they had tested more than 3,500 former officers. And while some considered this to be a waste of time and resources, their efforts finally paid off in 2012. The DNA testing confirmed that former police officer Mikhail Popkov was the Angarsk maniac, and he was swiftly arrested. In custody, Popkov admitted to everything and startled his fellow officers when he confessed to being responsible for at least 83 crimes in the region. Russian police have conclusively linked him to 78 murders, though Popkov himself admits the true number is around 83. But as the remaining crimes cannot be conclusively linked to him, he has not been convicted. For his crimes, he was sentenced to life in prison and is currently serving his sentence at the Black Dolphin Penal Colony, notoriously known as Russia's toughest prison. Number 2. When Lee Chun-jae was officially named as a suspect in the Hwaseong murders, he calmly told police, quote, "I still do not understand why I was not on the list of suspects at the time. I did not conceal any evidence. I don't know exactly why I lived such a life at that time. I didn't plan and prepare to commit the crimes, and I just acted depending on the situation." Between 1986 and 1991, the city of Hwaseong, South Korea, was plagued by an unknown assailant who was responsible for numerous unspeakable crimes. For 5 years, the women of Hwaseong held their breaths, wondering if they or someone they knew would be next. These crimes shook not only the city of Hwaseong, but all of South Korea, and to this day, they are often compared to the Zodiac killings. For the first time in modern South Korean history, there was a monster on the loose who was operating under the same motive. As a result, the police response was huge, and the police mobilized around the city to try and apprehend the man responsible. In total, 2 million police officers worked the Hwaseong case, and over 21,000 suspects were questioned in connection with the crimes. Despite their valiant efforts, the person responsible always managed to avoid detection. In 1989, Yoon Sung-yeol was arrested and charged in connection with one of the crimes. However, after lengthy appeals and Lee's confession, Yoon was exonerated. At the time of his confession, Lee Chun-jae was already serving a life sentence for the murder of his sister in 1994. He realized the game was up after officers informed him that his DNA matched DNA at the Hwaseong crime scenes. At first, he protested his innocence. However, after realizing the evidence against him was mounting up, he confessed. As the statute of limitations had passed in these cases, Lee will not be charged. However, South Korean authorities are happy that they're now able to close the case. Number 1. Between June of 2000 and August of 2001, the bodies of 3 women were found stuffed inside bags and suitcases around Broward County. The bodies were those of Kimberly Dietz-Livesey, Saya Demas, and Jessica Good. While authorities had no trouble identifying the 3 women, they did have a hard time finding the person responsible. Detectives told Local 10 News, quote, "Fingerprints from the evidence collected at the 2 crime scenes were a match. but the identity of the killer remained a mystery. That was until 2011, when there was a huge break in the case thanks to DNA and fingerprint analysis, and authorities finally had their man, Roberto Fernandez. Fernandez fled to Brazil just days after he had attacked Jessica Good. In hopes of evading US law enforcement, it appears that a change of scenery wasn't enough to change his behavior. And while in Brazil, Fernandez was accused and acquitted of the murder of his wife. After hearing the news, his wife's family was furious and attempted to take the law into their own hands, causing Fernandez to flee once again to Paraguay. While on the plane in 2005, Fernandez was involved in an accident that claimed his life. When Fernandez was arrested and taken to trial in Brazil, his fingerprints were taken and entered into a database. When investigators in the US ran the fingerprints again, they were surprised to have received a match. After conducting more research, authorities in Florida attempted to contact Fernandez in order to obtain a DNA sample, but learned that he was now deceased. To ensure that Fernandez hadn't simply faked his death to avoid justice, the US authorities worked with Brazilian authorities to exhume Fernandez's body and obtain a DNA sample. The sample confirmed that the body did belong to Fernandez, and that also Fernandez was responsible for the 3 Broward County crimes. A police sergeant told CBS News, quote, "We were able to confirm ultimately that Fernandez was now deceased. The body was exhumed, DNA was taken, and it all matched the profile. The suspect, Roberto Fernandez, was indeed responsible for all 3 of these crimes." Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked these videos, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.